Hello and welcome to the D&D 420 podcast. This is a show dedicated to helping you become a better dungeon master. I'm your host, Eric M. Hunter, and I am a struggling game master trying to figure out how to tell a better story. Joining me shortly is Jimmy Shields. He is the creator of D&D 420 and an avid D&D fan with over 30 years of experience. So I went back and started working on my map, to which I present to Jim to much criticism, like most of this world building that we've done. And I've kind of had a few epiphanies, and we discuss how to work through those. And then a quick side note, there was a couple of times where I mentioned that I was having trouble drawing the map and trying to figure out what things on the map should look like. Jim had an idea of adding a couple of YouTube videos of how to draw maps, especially for fantasy worlds. So I'm going to include those in the show notes, but we didn't get to talk about that during this recording. So I journeyed to the map, and the map said it was good. No, so I spent a lot more time than I was expecting to on this map, filling in details and trying to build just, what the terrain would look like. And so we'll go over what I did, and then I'll go over kind of the things that I ran into, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So the ones that I concentrated on the most, and again, this, I'll post the map in the show notes, so anybody who's listening who's not currently driving, who wants to look at the map as we talk about it, you're welcome to. If not, you should probably wait till you go back. Bellsboro being that area that's like the highest concentrated of wealth. I thought, all right, we're going to go to the part of like putting up walls. And now there's bridges that bridge from certain areas throughout the rest of the island. And Oglad, I've made it more foresty. There's some like hidden little lakes and ponds that are kind of scattered throughout. I've stretched the mountains out a little bit more up and down. If you look over in Westbridge, there's like some very faint lines, and that's set to signify just kind of like a barren wasteland of like just dirt, and just kind of like that, just no vegetation whatsoever. It's just very barren. And then I kind of got to the point where I felt like I was having Star Wars disease, where I was like, well, I have to have. It has to be cold over here. It has to be a wasteland over here. It has to be a wetlands over. Like, I got to that point where I was like, why am I putting in every topographical type that there is in the world that we know in this tiny little island? Well, it's not tiny, but
yeah, I was gonna say it's like the size of fucking America.
Yeah, it's pretty big. But I kept going like, oh, well, I gotta have desert, and I gotta have a swamp area, and I was like, this is getting silly to me. I don't know why it feels silly to me, but I don't know, because that's how it is in Star Wars. It's like, oh, there's a planet where it's all desert, like, oh, and then we have another planet and it's all snow and frost.
Okay,
like,
I gotcha.
Yeah, like that's why I started feeling that way, and I even went to the point I was like, well, I need a spot in the world where. Because we talk about these quote-unquote ancient aliens a little bit in the first episode, who, part of the people in St. Lonks are worried about them coming back and reclaiming the machine, because obviously they don't know where the machine comes from. They just use it. So if you look in the lower right-hand side, I built like these weird like stone statues. I was like, oh, this would be a cool thing to signify, like, oh, this is those aliens, this is their signal or statuesque of them. I was like, that would be an interesting thing. But like, I felt like I was just putting shit down to be putting shit down, and I wasn't really building anything around it, like, except for the things that I've already created. So like with St. Lawrence, like they're completely surrounded by mountains. That's the whole point of that region. Bellsboro, that's the high end area wealth. So they're going to have like the nicest of the nice. Everything is going to be completely manicured. They've got like this kind of fancy wall up and these more ceremonial bridges than, actual like with bridge and waterway, that kind of thing. Westbridge, it's very barren looking. Like there's no like structures that stick out. There's no like mountainous areas. There's no grassland. There's no water. And I'm like, okay, all of that stuff makes sense. And when I started playing around with the other regions of the map, and I was like, oh, I'm just putting stuff to put stuff. Like, there's no story here.
Yet.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yet. See, to me, that's okay. Because you've kind of decided, like, you've got these rather large kind of provinces or city-states, whatever they are. I mean, Bellspro looks as if it's about 400 miles wide by 800, 900 miles long.
Yeah.
So that's a big area. That's, California or something. I don't know. And so you've got several of these large areas, and you've got story for a few of them. And a few of them you're like, oh, maybe story seed.
Sure.
That's okay. But if you plant the seed, then you better be prepared to water it and grow it. So you've got, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 seeds that are really untended to as of yet.
Right.
So that's all good and well. And the names, and one thing I think I said last time that's just important to just as important to stress again, is that don't be afraid to change things. I see that you're not, and you're already changing a few little things here and there. Plus, I mean, you wildly changed your map,
Right.
so you've got the right idea. So if Afra later on you decide that whatever the original little seed you had that planted there didn't take, that's fine. Change the name of it even. Do everything to scour it off the map. Or even, redraw your map so it's not on there. Like, there's all kinds of ways to deal with seeds that won't grow or that you don't feel like tending to in the end. So
Right.
don't worry about those things now. We can trim that stuff back later, because right now what this is, it's not available for player consumption. This is a work in progress.
Right.
So that's all good and well.
Okay, sorry.
That's all good and well. Yeah.
So a few of the epiphanies that I had when I was doing this was that one, I felt like I was just putting things to put things. And it reminded me again, I think I've said this every episode since we've been doing this, world building is like building everything in succession. So it's like if I come up with a region, what is the story behind that region? Then I put it on the map. Okay, now it reflects in the rest of the world, and I move on to the next thing. For me, anyway, I think that's a personal thing for me to keep that going. Okay. The other thing, which I already knew, is I am a terrible drawer. I am not an artist. But the other thing I realized was like, oh, obviously I can see these things, and you can kind of guess what they are if you were just looking at it plainly, outside of playing the game of this world that it's created on. And it got me thinking, like, I need to sit down and look at other hand-drawn maps to see what they use to signify mountains, what they use to signify water, what they use to signify forest and foliage and that kind of thing. That makes a little bit more common sense than just me drawing puffy clouds on things. And they're like, oh yeah, no, that's forest. Those are woods. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I kind of got to thinking was something that you actually just kind of talked about a little bit in terms of like changing the name of the area or redrawing the map where it doesn't exist anymore. When I get to the point of like, okay, we're playing in this world, this is the map of the world, this is the game, and then the players don't like it. Like the players don't like the map. They don't like the world that I've created. Maybe they like the game that we're playing in, but so how do you combat something in the sense of one, existential dread of I just spent hours of my time building this and now nobody likes it. And two, how to correct it to a point where both me and the players are satisfied.
I would challenge you to think of it this way. Let's say you're playing in my game, and so far you've played in things that were fine, right? You could say, oh, well, it was at least fine.
Sure.
Or cool or whatever, however you felt about it, it was fine. But let's say the next thing I came up with, let's say you see this dragon's claw, the one I'm working on right now along with this program. So you see the dragon's claw and you think, well, that's a really cool map, but then you play in it and think, this really let me down. The map was so cool looking and When you told me the little story about it, it sounded really neat, and now we're playing in it, and it has really let me down. How would you, as a player, think that you would deal with that? How would that feel to you, or what would you think? How could that be made better from a player's perspective? Ask yourself that first, and then think about, well, what do you want to do? You want to make that player happy, right? As a DM.
Right.
So you're definitely, you've got that perspective that I do not. I don't have the player's perspective very much. I mean, I do, but I don't. I'm a terrible player. I've said it time and time again. I tend to be DMing in my head while we're playing. But I like to play on occasion if I can. So you've got that perspective. Try to dip back into that and, use that player's perspective. What are the things that are heavy when I'm playing in this game? Or what are the things that I think are, vestigial? What could be cut away? And think about those kinds of things. And, that's how you're going to get that feel we were talking about last week anyway, is by kind of making it your own, or, what's different about mine. And this is just another handle on that, another tool in your shed to be able to do so.
So I guess, I don't know, because thinking back to some of the games that I've played in your world, like, I don't know. I guess I've never really been to the point where I was like, oh, this is just dumb. Like, this is stupid. I don't like this. Like, I don't think I've ever felt like there's been parts in games where, when we got to like a certain town or what, perfect example. When we were playing this last, man, I really wish I could remember all the names of your games. This last one where I was playing the elf, the princess.
Rise of the King.
Yeah.
World in Turmoil.
If I'm remembering correctly, we walked into a town that was basically desolate because either a plague had just gone through or something had just gone through, and there was like the roads were like littered with like dead bodies, and I think it was right before the water fell out of the sky. And we were walking around, and like, because of whatever happened, like, nobody wanted to talk to us because we were outsiders and this terrible thing just happened, and the last thing they want to do is talk about this terrible thing. And I remember sitting there thinking like I get it. Like, I get, like, some shit just happened here and we just missed it, and now nobody wants to mess with us because of, they've got quote unquote more important things to deal with. But like, I kind of felt like I was just waiting. I was just waiting for something to happen. Does that make sense?
Sure. And that it's easy to kind of fall into that. I feel like I'm in the group that I'm playing in now, as well. One of the groups I'm playing in, I sort of feel that way as well, but I have to look back and challenge myself and say, the DM has given me plenty of opportunities to say what I might want to do, and he's presented me with a lot of options, things to look at. And that's something that you have to do with each group is going to be a little different as well. And I try to mix my games up as much as possible, sometimes extremely successfully, and everybody's like, that was super cool. Or sometimes, like you said, it maybe felt like it was
like
not
I was
quite
like
right.
waiting. Yeah.
So,
well, I think, and maybe this is just me, but like, I feel like you do a very good job at like tailoring certain events and situations to particular characters for like, and again, this is something we've talked about.
Yeah,
exactly. And usually in my, like, sometimes I feel like if something's going on that I'm not like clicking with, I immediately think like, oh, this is for somebody else. I'm just going to kind of hang out and, participate as much as I can, but this is for somebody else. Like, that's kind of how I feel, I guess.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. I've never thought of that before, because I think the reason I do spotlighting, and this is a little off topic, but the reason I do spotlighting is because there are always going to be players in the group who are a little weaker role players, or won't speak up or often get buried in the conversation. So I may not spotlight those characters who are really active in the story. I may usually just spotlight, somebody who hasn't said a whole lot or somebody who only speaks up when spoken to.
Right.
And so, I'm trying to really get those players, and it's usually about half of the group, I feel like, in larger games, at least half of the group. And so I'll even spotlight some of the other players that aren't necessarily getting buried, but they're just more quiet to try to let the rest of the group go. There's a lot of that happens as well. Like, well, I don't want to hog the spotlight. And if I notice they've done a really good job of that, I'll spotlight them and kind of make them step up and, kind of push them in one of those, combat-driven encounters that are really cool because it was meant for you, or social encounters that are directly related to your backstory. But those generally only last an hour. I would say each encounter is about an hour-ish.
Okay.
So, and that might be it could be part of the thing where I tried a little too hard in that one to spread the spotlight around, or it could also be that maybe just the style wasn't clicking.
Okay. Well, so, and not to keep harping on this because you're right, this was kind of just an off-tangent part, but I'm thinking back now, the other thing that we may not have mentioned too much, but there are a couple of players that we and the guild that we play with that are obviously seasoned. They've been doing it for a long time, but they're also very, what's the nice way of putting it? I was gonna say pushy. I don't mean pushy. They're just very
boisterous.
Very boisterous. Yes, thank you. And sometimes when that happens, I feel like, all right, but so for instance, when Tommy's playing.
No, I didn't know we were going to throw names around.
It's fine. We'll throw Tommy around.
He knows.
I was going to say, yeah, he knows. This will be no surprise to Tommy. But Tommy is a very boisterous player. He's a very powerful player. And at times, as a group, either we signify it or he just takes the role of leader. And for the most part, that's usually the best decision. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
accepted among the group a lot of times.
Right. Because he knows the right way to do just enough, to give just enough information to ask just half the question that's the right question for us, for the rest of the group to kind of like, man, this makes me feel really bad for saying this, but like quote unquote catch up to what's going on, because Tommy just has a level of intelligence of this game that I will never grasp. Like you as well. Like you guys just understand like above, because you've been doing it for so long.
Well, there is a lot of experience at the table, and he has been in my game for 23 years, in the same game world. And I would dare say the world wouldn't be the same if he hadn't played in it. He's played that long, and he's got that many NPC or retired characters that he's played that are now NPCs in the game world, influential NPCs.
Right.
So he's literally, and he even has one that has made immortality and has helped shape the gods, which that's happening with other players have done that as well that have played for a really long time, such as Tim, or one of Brandon's characters has now influenced the heavens, because I just want to honor those people who got me, started early with me. So that helps shape the world. So when that happens, of course he's going to have a deeper understanding, because he has a character that he played that I understand so well. I made it a god, and that is now a portion of the reality of that world. So is it a little unfair? Like, no, not really, because it helps create an ambiance, because now
it creates the game. Yeah.
Yeah. I now have a player who understands this part of my world so intrinsically that as I'm storytelling, they can help narrate through the play of their character, because they understand it so well. And that's what the beautiful thing about people playing in Dragonlance together, or Dark Sun, or Faerun, is that it's easy to find people who know about it, and we can all play together, and that happens. That's one of the beautiful things about extremely popular game worlds. But it becomes addictive when you've made your own that starts to feel like that. And I've got a dozen players who I can plug into any part of my world, and they'll feel right at home. They'll understand. They'll know NPC names. They'll know faction names. They'll know, oh, these guys don't like those guys, or you can get a ship out of this harbor easily, or there's all sorts of things that they may know
Right.
that help move the game along as a storyteller, because they can easily play a character from there.
Yeah. And then, and I feel, and thinking back to like just a few moments of those games, there's been times where I was like, oh, Tommy's character's kind of taking the reins, like he's asking all the right questions and he's making all the right suggestions. So a lot of the time during those points, it's like, all right, so this part's just really not for me. Like, I'm going to obviously contribute and I'm going to do whatever I can, but I am not, I'm not going to be making any big decisions here because Tommy's knocking it out of the park right now. And I feel like a lot of that is just due to his ability to play. His
Well,
level
you're right.
of play.
You're right.
Yeah.
His ability to help shape the situation from a player's perspective, and that's something I think we should talk about maybe at length in another session.
Yeah.
Because, and I'll touch on it just momentarily here, is that any of the players can be doing that. There's just a confidence in the suggestion of the ideas that he has. So if you had portrayed just as vehemently or argued just as vehemently about something else and related it back to something that makes sense that your character knows about, it's going to be hard for me to resist saying, yeah, I'm a player pleaser as a
Right.
DM. If you want to role play, I'll role play. And if you've got a good idea that I haven't shaped into my world, I'm going to let it fly. I'm going to help sew it into there. There's lots of things that you've come up with, and lots of things that Nathan has come up with, and some of the other players. But, obviously mostly Tommy, because he's in every game, and he is the most well voiced, the most boisterous, the most assertive player, and his ideas are great. He's a smart guy. He comes up with really good ideas, and it's really, the thing is, my stories are not difficult to figure out. He knows what to look for. He knows what my stories are going to be like. I do like to put mystery into the game. I do like to put revelations in there. Plot twists, turn of events, kind of gotcha moments or didn't see that coming moments. And he knows right where to look for those things, because I have a particular style. And that's going to be, the more you play with me, the more you'll see those, because I have a kind of a pattern when I'm writing certain types of games.
And that makes sense. I mean, that's...
I think all of us will.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, so, okay, getting back to what we were talking about. What were we talking about? Oh, so, yeah, I mean, you kind of already touched on it, where it's, I mean, if there's just a part of the game that the player doesn't like, it makes you think, like, okay, well, I kind of set this up for you. It's not like, when when I was, searching out for players, and I'm like, oh, what kind of game is it? And it's like, oh, it's a fantasy world, and there's this, this kind of weird machine and thing. It's not like, all right, you come down for session 0 and we're playing Care Bears or something. So it's like, so is there like a level of...
Somebody might like that, though. There might be people
Well,
out there.
true.
That would be the type of thing.
That's not
where
what I meant.
in our group, yeah. If I sat down and like the first encounter was Care Bears, and you're playing like a grizzly fighter, you might not like that. However, with a different group, and I'll always go back and stress, it's so important to talk in session 0, is this game for you? The more things you talk about your DMing style or your preferences in session 0, the more you'll curb any problems later on. And that's all about knowing the right questions to ask, which that's going to be another thing. Like I think we talked about it actually in the first season of session 0 a little bit, but I could literally spend an entire 30-minute episode talking about nothing but a session zero and feel like all I have done is given you good ideas that you can totally expand upon until the end of time.
True. So, but yeah, so I feel like I don't think I will. Obviously, at some point, the map has to be done. Do you know what I mean? Like, at some point, there are going to be things that happen in this world that would technically reflect the map in terms of how it's drawn. But I mean, I'm not going to draw a new map every. Well, I mean, I guess I could draw a new map every session if things are changing that much. But that was the other thing the revelation that I had. I was like, obviously, there would be more than one map, because I would think that if this island or this world is so old with this machine that's like, burying under all of these tunnels and stuff underneath these people's feet, that clearly somebody would have tried to map where all of these vines of machines go. So I was like, oh, I can build kind of like a map on top of this map to show like, yeah. And then I was like, well, shoot, that opens up a whole lot more in terms of like storytelling of like, okay, well, who drew the map? How accurate would this map be? Can you trust this map? And then how that would play into the actual campaign session.
No, you can also draw ancient maps, which are really, really fun to do and incorporate into your story, because as political affiliations shift and regimes fall and alliances fail, the map changes. At least, maybe not the surface of the map, maybe not where the trees are, where the swamp is, where the ocean is. That may not change very much.
Right.
But where the kingdoms are situated and where they leave behind artifacts from the time that they were there, that could be very important in the game and be very interesting. The type of thing that draws people in to search out things like, well, why are these Inaki relics in Midia, or why are these Midian relics here in Inok?
Right.
That's really interesting. What happened? And then you have this old map that tells you, oh, well, this area here, there used to be a temple there. Well, if we go there, we might find this thing. That's really a kind of an Indiana Jones way to look at it, and it's something that's easy to solve, because this is a game. This is not a real life puzzle. We got to stop ourselves and think, this is a game. We do want to get into combat. We do want to have some of these kind of iconic D&D moments, those are very simple and pure moments. The more convoluted you make it, the less D&D it is. So you got to be careful. Well, you don't have to be. You can get as wild and dynamic as you want, but I feel like it's best to preserve some of that D&D feel of fantasy and of high fantasy, not just sort of fantastic, which is it's a very simple feel. So the more mystery and the more intrigue, the more plot and the more political things you put in, you're kind of edging further away from D&D and into like this other thing. But that's what's going to define your world. How much of that D&D, the pure, innocent, straight out of the player's handbook D&D, are you trying to preserve in your game world?
Right.
You need to let people know right up front. I have to do that whenever I have a new player. There's no such thing as goblins. None. There are no orcs. None. You'll never encounter anything like that. When people talk about goblins in my game, that's a children's fairy tale. Nothing more. You can say you saw a goblin or the thing looks like a goblin, but we all know, like, any real adult is going to laugh at you because goblins don't exist. And there might be all sorts of mythos about goblins, but you're never going to fight one.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I feel like having like those kind of hard staples in the world and explaining those things up front, like with my world, like I would explain the machine, because the machine has such a big impact on this world, and then obviously depending on what time frame or whatever, if Bell's Pro is at the height of wealth and technology, then I obviously talk about that, So, and I feel like I've asked this question before, but you keep coming back to me saying that there's more work to do. So when do we get to play?
Like I said, man, you've got enough now. If you've got a little bit of history there, and you got your nice map, that was one of your assignments that we didn't get to touch on, was your recent history of the world.
True, yeah.
Which might inspire ancient maps or previous maps of the areas.
Right.
Which might inspire you to start looking at some of these mapping tools that we have available at our fingertips, so that you can produce the map quickly and efficiently. But I digress. It's really fun to draw hand-drawn maps. All of the maps I have up until this point of the past year, they were all hand-drawn. And even when we went digital, we used my hand-drawn maps as the actual structure that the maps were built around.
Yeah.
And then imported into digital. And then, so now we're just breaking away from, in the D&D 420 game world of Karn or Adventures in Blood. Now all the maps are going to be digital from now on, because I actually invested in a really good program that I really like, and that's what the map that you see that's attached to it was attached last week, right, to that program.
Yep.
That is that was made on this paid mapping program that I have. It was only like $25 or $30, called Wonder Draft, and it's extremely versatile. A lot of fun to use. You don't have
link to it in the show notes.
It's really cool. Like, I totally endorse it for free. They can have my endorsement. It's a great program. I let one of my buddies use it, who does all the digital mapping stuff. He's a Photoshop guy, and he's really good with it. Mike. Oh, okay. Of course, you've worked with Mike.
Yeah, I have.
But I wanted to, not take the power from him, but kind of some of that added responsibility that he's done a lot of my mapping stuff over the past few years, and start to take a lot of that on, because I have a lot that needs to be done. So I have to take it on myself and start trying to tackle it as well, because there's so many maps that need to be made. I think I have like 24 maps now that are like kind of core maps without repeating any like overlap. Oh, wow. I mean, yeah, like 23, 24 maps. So there's like 5 or 6 that everybody's seen a whole bunch of times.
Right.
And then there's, 15 more or so that have been glimpsed upon in rarity. Because they need to be redone. Yeah, they need to be redone. Like I said, when I originally made maps, those areas where we gamed when I was really young, those were for me, so I could tell you how long it took to get from point A to point B.
Right.
So, okay. So to work on, we got to work on, and I've got to work on this too. Like, I'm for the Dragon's Claw, I've got to work on this as well. I came up with some really cool stuff in flora and fauna. I got stuck in that, and like I found some really, really neat stuff that I'm trying to link it all together. So it's really going to be in depth there of what I can do with some of the flora and fauna of the area.
Yeah.
And the monsters are going to be, I've got it in my mind what I want the monsters to be like and which ones I'm going to use, but I'm going to map that out as well as go in and do a little history. And I would say that you might want to start doing the same thing. So for each region that you've created, you'll think, what kind of monsters are here? And you may want to draw those regions totally differently than your political ones that you've got there.
Okay.
Some of them are going to overlap. Like where in my game world where Detrith are, they overlap all kinds of different kingdoms and continents. So their terrain is different than other terrain, but they only live in certain types of areas. And so where are they? And you start filtering all them in, all the different monster types, until you have like what makes sense. Don't put too many alpha type monsters in one area. That won't make a lot of sense.
So these monsters were just pulling them out of the book, or?
Sure, yeah. Or if you've got your ideas, make sure you use a lot of your stuff. And if you have ideas for monsters, absolutely think how powerful they're going to be and find something with that challenge rating and totally reskin it.
Yeah.
describe the way the abilities work totally different. The way they look is totally different, and it'll be a completely different experience as a player. But it's the exact same stat block as an orc or what have you.
Right.
You know, of course, after a while, the players catch on to what you've done, but it's not about that. It's about telling the story and capturing a feel in your world that the players enjoy loosening up and role playing in.
Right.
So I'll get some history and background for the last 100 years in my game. Plus, I'm gonna continue to finish up my flora and fauna and monsters.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the D&D 420 podcast. For everything D&D 420 related, check out dnd420.com. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us there on the website and on YouTube at D&D 420. Lastly, as always, if you'd like to support the show, you can do that by telling another DM about the show and by visiting us on Apple Podcasts and leaving a rating and review. Thanks for subscribing and being a part of our work here at D&D 420. We will see you next week.